We started a series last week, what does love look like? And we looked at the fact that the love of God is very different to the love of the world. The love of the world is materialistic, it's led by the flesh, it's quite selfish, but the love that is from God is like water. It's powerful, it's gentle, it's refreshing, it's quenching, it's selfless, it always flows downwards, except Philippa pointed out that sometimes it goes upwards when it's evaporated, but then it comes back down, because if you don't sow, you don't reap. So we had a great discussion about love last week, and the fact that we aren't just called. I shared the story of being up in a monastery in Bulgaria and how easy it was to feel love for those few days. But the fact is we don't live in a monastery. We live in everyday life where people give us a hard time. They swear at us in the cricket field. They give us a hard time. They poke us with the compass. They whatever. We're called to love in the midst of the reality of everyday life. And Jesus was living in a very tumultuous kind of society, and yet he demonstrated and he spoke about love in the midst of that reality. So it's not just something academic or super spiritual, but it's about everyday life. And I mentioned the fact that on average we spend 4,000 hours in church in our life, but 88,000 hours at work. So the place that we need to love the most and the most effectively is in the workplace. And what I'd like to pick up on today is a story from John chapter 8. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to paraphrase it, and then I'm just going to break it down, and then we'll go into a time of discussion. At the moment, the way we configured, it just feels that there's life on us having discussions. The meeting comes alive when we go and we talk. So I'm going to read from John chapter 8, and the scripture up there is from the NIV, but I'm going to read from the Message version because Winston's not here, and he doesn't like the Message version. All right. So John chapter 8 verses 1 to 11, it says, Jesus went to the Mount Olives, okay? And but soon he came back to the temple again, and swarms of people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. The religious scholars and Pharisees led in a woman who had been caught in the act of adultery. Okay, so she was having sex with someone who was not her husband. They stood her in the plain sight of everyone and said, "Teacher, this woman was caught red-handed in the act of adultery. Moses in the law gives orders to stone such persons. What do you say?" They were trying to trap Jesus into saying something incriminating so they could bring charges against him. Jesus bent down and wrote with his finger in the dirt. They kept at him, badgering him. He straightened up and said, "The sinless one among you, go first. Throw the stone." Bending down again, he wrote some more in the dirt. Hearing that, they walked away, all the men who were bringing the accusation, the religious men, one after another, beginning with the oldest. The woman was left alone. Jesus stood up and spoke to her. "Woman, where are they? Does no one condemn you?" "No one, Master." And so Jesus said, "Neither do I. Go on your way. From now on, don't sin." Okay. So the context is they're in the temple. There's a crowd of people who are listening to Jesus, and in storms this group of religious uptight men with this woman caught in the act of adultery. She is wrong. She's a sinner. She's guilty. But it's amazing, number one, that they must have been spying on her. Number two, it takes two to commit adultery, and there's no man brought in. It's just a woman. And there in the midst of the crowd, they're trying to incriminate Jesus. They're after Jesus. They're trying to trap Jesus into saying or doing something which will incriminate him, because they are threatened by the fact that he's got all these crowds that are following him. And as the story goes, Jesus bends down and he starts drawing in the sand. No one quite knows what, because the text doesn't tell us. He could have been writing the 10 Commandments. He could have been writing down the sins of what these men committed. Or it was a rabbinical tradition for the teachers to use writing in the sand as a tradition. So we don't know what he was writing. And then they keep badgering him. They keep on at him, saying, "Come on, are you going to find her guilty?" They wanted him to step into the role of being a judge. And as the story says, those of you who are guiltless, you throw the first stone. And suddenly they get caught in their own trap, and they sort of start backing off. The oldest one first sort of backing off and thinking, oh, I'm caught. Let me just find my way out of here. I'm a little bit trapped. And off they go one by one. And Jesus bends down again. And interesting, in bending down, some of the commentators say Jesus really is getting down to the level of the woman. The woman must have been down on the ground. And basically, he gets down to her level. He stoops down and he draws on the ground. And eventually he gets up and Jesus says, well, where are all those men who were condemning you? And then he says, go and sin no more. Okay, so that is the text. So I've entitled this morning, Love is Gracious Without Compromise. Unfortunately, the church and as Christians, we have often presented to the world ourselves or our God as being uptight, judgmental, cruel, unkind, unwelcoming, and legalistic. And sometimes people say things like, hey, I'm miserable enough. I don't want to come to church and be made to feel more guilty. We sometimes as the church, we put out quite a harsh face. And we make the church to be like this wall that people have to climb over in order to qualify to get in, rather than being this beautiful open door where we invite people to come in. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. He was an invitation. Christianity is an invitation to Christ rather than this big high wall where we make it difficult to come in, so that those of us who are here today are all more pious and more righteous than those who are not. That is not the Christian faith. And Jesus demonstrates it beautifully in this story. But there's an equal danger of the church lacking distinctiveness and becoming compromised. So they speak about the fact that if you ride a horse, you can fall off on the left or you can fall off on the right of the horse. You can fall off on the side of being overly legalistic and harsh, and you can fall off on the other side of being licentious. In other words, being compromised and not calling sin for what it is. At the end of the story, Jesus doesn't say go back and continue. He says go and sin no more. So he's both gracious, but he's also truthful without compromise. And it says in John chapter 1 that Jesus came full of grace and truth. He's both gracious and he's truth. And the beauty about the story of Jesus, the life of Jesus and the Bible, is that we're not just given a textbook of do's and don'ts, but we're actually given a story about a man living love perfectly in an imperfect society, because that's exactly where we live. Does that make sense? Are you following that? There's a danger on one side of us being overly legalistic as a church. On the other side, we don't stop calling sin for what it is, because sin is damaging, sin is destructive, sin is unhelpful. And when we call people out of sin, we're actually demonstrating love to them, because it actually saves them from their demise, which is caused by sin. And so we've got this beautiful balance in this story that is depicted and lived out by Jesus in a very real situation. Christianity, the Christian faith, is an invitation. It's exclusive. In Luke chapter 19, it says that he's out to seek and to save the lost. And in this story, he is not only out to save the woman, he's out to save those religious leaders as well from their own hypocrisy. He is always out to save everyone. He came to seek and to save the lost. Like that song, the first song that we sang, it became a little bit eclipsed by Way Jehovah and the other ones. But the first one was, I'll kick down a wall, I'll run up a mountain, because that is what he does in pursuit of us, every single one of us. So what does the life of Jesus reveal? First of all, Jesus was and is a friend of sinners. And all of us say, oh, just as well, because that's how we got in. We came as sinners. So Matthew chapter 11 verse 19, it says, John came neither eating, John the Baptist, neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man, Jesus, came eating and drinking, and they say he is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. People looked at the life of Jesus. People looked at the fact that Jesus spent time eating with ordinary people, going into their homes, and they said, well, he cannot be the Son of God. When in Luke chapter 7, when a sinful woman comes into the home where Jesus is the guest of a Pharisee, and she puts down her hair and she starts wiping his feet, which was really very provocative, the people would judge Jesus as being a friend of sinners and not actually realizing that she was a sinner. He goes into the home of Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, and the people look at him and they say, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner.
But Romans chapter 5 and verse 8 says, God demonstrates his love for us, that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. None of us qualified ourselves before we got saved. We got saved from being outright sinners. It doesn't matter what school you went to. It doesn't matter what car you drive. It doesn't matter how much you earn. Every single one of us stepped from being a sinner into being made righteous by Christ. There is no other qualification. As nice a person as you may be. Ooh, I nearly mentioned a name there, but I would have been dangerous. As nice a person as any of you may be, every one of us steps over from being a sinner to being made righteous. 1 Timothy 1 verse 15 says, Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners, and Paul says, of whom I am the worst. Jesus received outcasts. He spent time with those who were sinners, those who were tax collectors. And now you're hearing tax collectors. Maybe in today's speak it would be corrupt politicians. So you can fill in the blanks of the names that come to mind of corrupt politicians. Jesus would spend time with ordinary people, with religious leaders, and with corrupt politicians. Some of the people that you and I get very angry with when we open News 24 and we think, oh, not again. He spent time with real and ordinary people. And Jesus was a guest of all sorts of people. Jesus went into the homes. There's something very intimate and very personal about going into someone's home, accepting an invitation to someone's home and having a meal with them. And Jesus is consistently going into people's homes and having meals with people. He goes into the home of Mary and Martha. He goes into the home of Zacchaeus. He goes into the home of the tax collectors. He goes in and he sits down with them on the road to Emmaus. The people invite him to come and spend the night. He says, I will stay. He goes into the home of people. He goes into the home of Simon the leper. He was a leper. He was diseased. He was considered an outcast, unclean. And Jesus went on and he reclined, which means he sort of sat in a semi-lying position, which is not saying that you can go home, young people, and lie on the couch and say, well, that's how Jesus lay. He lay on the couch. But he reclined at the table with a leper. And so you can go on a multitude of examples of where Jesus is going into people's homes and he's being misunderstood and regarded as being a friend of sinners. He goes to the wedding in Cana. We read about it in John chapter 2. He spends time at a social and a family occasion that would have gone on for the better part of a week. So what is love like? If we take this particular story and we are going to try and depict a face of Christ and a face of church and a face of Christians that is gracious but uncompromising. And I would suggest that one of the words is the word kind. Love is kind. The world is a cruel place. Do I need to tell you that? Not just because you've got teachers setting exams, but the world is a cruel place. It's hard out there. And are you living in the same world as me? No. Life is cruel. Life is hard. People are ungracious. People are unforgiving. One of the things I do if I read an article on News 24, I like to sometimes go down to read the comments at the bottom. Man, people are hard. People are ungracious. Man, what the vitriol that comes out of people at the bottom. What people say. Just this last week, there were these hearings around the Phoenix riots. And you go down to the bottom and you read the comments and you think, my goodness, how ungracious can you be? How racist can you be? How degrading can you be? And we've got to make sure that as believers, as the church, we are presenting love that is kind, love that is sympathetic, love that is considerate, love that is gentle, love that is courteous or polite, love that is thoughtful, love that is understanding, love that attracts people. As long as we are harsh and judgmental, we are not going to attract people to that God. We are going to drive people the other way. They're going to say, those people, they make me feel miserable and they make me feel judged. I don't know if any of you have been following this Belarusian border, the border between Belarus and Poland. And there are these refugees, these migrants who've been seemingly flown in from the Middle East, from Iran and Iraq, and they've been brought in, and they've been sent to basically cause trouble on the Polish border at the edge of the European Union. And there's been a standoff for days, and people have died of the freezing cold, and they're trying to get across into the European Union. And there's this line of riot police, and they're stopping them. But some of the people through the forest have got in. They've got into Poland. And there are certain people in Poland who are putting a green light in their window to say that if you are a migrant that has come into Poland, you're welcome to come to our home to get some shelter and some food. Just grace. Just grace. Maybe they shouldn't be there. Maybe they shouldn't be allowed through. Maybe they got through the border by going under or over or whatever. But there are people with green lights are saying, you've come across, you're suffering. Here's a green light. Come, you welcome in our home. That's gracious. The article that I read that in, it didn't say they're Christians, but hopefully they are Christians. People who have got a measure of compassion and loving acceptance. We said last week that love is friendly. And these masks, I'm not against masks, they're sensible. I'm not anti them. But man, these make us seem unfriendly, eh? We've come to realize, I think, since the pandemic with these masks, that it isn't just the eyes that tell a story, our whole faces. But love is friendly. Love smiles. Love laughs easily. Love looks at people. Love looks at strangers. Love asks questions of other people. You know, we live in a world where we don't ask questions of other people. I don't know if you've noticed, people most often speak about themselves. And they project themselves into conversations. It's very rare that people genuinely inquire about other people and ask questions. How are you doing? And drilling down to find out how people are. Love is friendly. Love asks questions of other people and takes interest in other people. Love is inclusive. It invites. There are no barriers to entry. The church is not some secretive society of us four and no more, or you have to drive a car that's white in color, or wear certain clothes or anything. No, it's come. It's an invitation. And that's where Jesus disrupted the institution of Judaism, because he was just inviting. He was saying, those who, you religious people are rejecting me, but it's actually the sinners, the prostitutes, the tax collectors who are welcoming me, because they know that they are sinners in need of a Savior. But love also tells people the truth. Like Jesus did. Go and sin no more. And so when we get to discussion just now, we've got to, how do we graciously tell people the truth where they don't feel judged, but we're also accountable for the truth that sin is disruptive and people need to be called to repentance. And this is a beautiful example of a balance where Jesus is able to get the balance between grace and truth. We live in such a politically correct world that nowadays you've got to be so careful before you open your mouth on anything, because someone is going to find fault. You're going to be offending someone. And the truth does offend. And we've got to speak the truth in love. We don't just compromise and bow the knee to whatever the spirit of the age is saying. We also need to call people to the truth. And love makes peace. Love reconciles. Love goes out of the way and makes an effort to reconcile. There's a difference, I'm sure you're aware, between peacekeeping and peacemaking. Peacekeeping is when you just say, everything's fine, and you don't actually ever deal with it. You just sweep everything under the carpet. But love makes peace. It goes out of its way and it makes an effort to reconcile people. You know, there's a saying that the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. Sometimes some recently now had to be involved in some relational reconciliation. And unfortunately, sometimes things have to first get worse before they get better. But love goes out of the way to genuinely reconcile people by having some hard conversations in order to get people reconciled. And then lastly, we recognize the fact that there's always two sides to every story. We live in a society that is so divided and so divisive and such strong opinions on both sides. Proverbs chapter 18 and verse 17, it says, the first one to plead their case seems right until another comes and cross-examines him. So we've all watched those movies of a court case where we hear one side of the story and, yeah, I know who the murderer is, I know it is, and then you hear there's another side to the story. And we live in a society where there's at least two sides to every single story. And if we're going to be peacemakers, if we're going to be those who express love, we've got to realize that there's always two sides to every story, at least two sides. And love makes an effort to hear both sides in order to bring reconciliation between people in a very divided society. Okay, I'm sure that's my 20 minutes up for the young people. I think right on the dot, almost. Okay, so we've got a couple of questions. Andile's got the question, so he's going to take the young people out. Grab a biscuit on the way if there are any left, if the children haven't eaten them all. And we'll spend about 15 minutes, and then we'll do the same here. So I'll give you an instruction in a moment. So basically for ourselves as well, please get around a table. Get into groups of 4 or 5, just be kind to one another. Be kind. Okay, so in getting around like this, it's about engaging. It's about the fact that so often the answers, you guys already know the answers and you come from your own life experiences. Please don't treat these like you at the school classroom that you have to go through every single question. It's really just trying to unlock for us to digest what does love look like. What does love look like? Because the greatest commandment is love. And like we said last week, Jesus said that they will know you by your love. And so we've got to digest and discuss what love looks like. So there are questions. How would you define kindness? If love is kind, which it is, according to 1 Corinthians 13, love is kind. How would you define kindness? What does it look like? What does kindness look like in everyday interactions? How do we get the right balance between grace and telling the truth? We're all in those situations often. How do we get that balance? Whether we're parenting, whether we're married, however it might be in society, whether you're a boss, how do we get the balance between truth and grace? And can you think of any examples? And what words would you use to describe love from your experience? So go for it. Let there be noise.